Welcome, everyone. Armenia's economy is expected to grow 7% this year, according to a new update from the World Bank. Much of that is being driven by the services sector, especially tourism, finance, and IT. At the same time, Armenia's security situation is deteriorating, and a number of structural bottlenecks continue dragging on Armenia's long-term growth prospects, like its closed borders. To help us understand what's going on, I'm joined today by Dr. Vache Gabrielyan, the Dean of the Manoogian Simone College of Business and Economics at the American University of Armenia. Dr. Gabrielyan previously served as Armenia's Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and Vice Governor of Armenia's Central Bank. Dr. Gabrielyan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
One thing that's so striking about Armenia right now is that the economy is exceeding expectations even while the security situation is deteriorating. Can you talk to us about that and also give us a brief overview of what's happening in the economy? What stands out to you from this year?
Well, actually, you mentioned that the current update is 7% of the World Bank prognosis, I believe. If it's going to stay calm and we are not going to have any wars or continued skirmishes on the border, we are going to have much higher GDP growth. And the GDP was going to grow eventually, but nobody was expecting of any of observers that this is going to be that high. Even when the government was presenting the budget and was aiming at 7%, it was actually saying that the potential is about 4 or 5%, but if the things turn good, we are going to have about 7%. But nobody expected to have this type of growth. And to me, while there was growth potential, and some of it was coming from last year that was due to recovery from COVID because many other countries around recovered to the 2019 levels. We didn't, and it was expected to come somewhere. In the first quarter, there was unexpected bonanza because of the huge flows that we see from Russia. Since February, there are a lot of financial flows, a lot of people coming, and because of that, we have, first of all, increase in the three industries you mentioned. The industry number one is the finance industry, particularly it's banking. Second is the transportation, and third is the hospitality, 45-30% increase. And this is huge numbers because you cannot have 45 or 50% growth without significant investments, new conditions, new technologies, etc. But this came in very short. And to compare it and put in a comparative perspective, we are not the only country that is doing this. If you look at neighboring Georgia, we have similar situations. The financial industry is growing very rapidly. If you are looking, for example, about the amount of transfers from Russia to Georgia, they increased manifold, 6, 8. The amount of cash that Russians increased in Georgia are manifold. I mean cash dollars that Georgian banks are importing to Georgia. And as a result of it, this is an obvious regional pattern of Russian people and money relocating, some of them temporarily, some of them for the hopes of later travel to Europe or other places, some of them more permanently. It is a flow that is happening in all these countries, and as a result of it, we have this growth. Why the dire situation in the south is not having impact on it? Because the growth that we have is mostly concentrated in Yerevan and around Yerevan. If we are talking about transportation, it is not transportation services to the south. If we are talking about finance and banking industry, most of the transactions that are happening is happening within Yerevan. not all the people who came are in Yerevan. There are some people who are in other towns, but the great majority of them are there. The transportation servicing, the hotel and hospitality industry, etc., is in Yerevan. So as a result of it, we have very high growth. In my assessment, the growth currently outpaces the potential of the economy. It doesn't mean economy should have been at zero rates, and if there was no Russian money, economy would have been stalled. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you are going to have double-digit growth and 18% growth in August, and by half a year you have 14% growth, when all you were counting on was 5 to 7%, and 7% was the optimistic one, it means that we are having a growth pattern that is exceeding our potential. As a result of it, you see rapid appreciation of the currency. And this is a sign that when your currency appreciates 20% in 6 months, it cannot happen overnight. And this type of speedy appreciation is a problem. And we have to understand this is because the flows that we are experiencing are far outpacing our capacity to deal with them. Does it mean it is bad? Does it mean we should be worried about it? No, we should actually welcome all the flows are coming, tax them, and actually try to digest it in a more equitable speed. I mean gradually, because all of this we don't have the capacity to absorb. As a result of it, new capacities should be developed and enter the market. And as a result of it, we are going to see the continuation of growth for a while. I'm not talking about years, I'm not talking about decades. I'm talking about particular period of time, because the uncertainties in the environment are so high that I never remember when there was major war issue in Russia, there was major war issue in Armenia, there were uncertainties that can go in either direction. So all I can say that given that we are not going to have armed conflict, this pattern is going to continue for a while. And in the near future, we are going to see this impact of Russian exodus, whatever you call it, on the impact. And as I said, this is not unique to Armenia. There are a lot of people and money living for Georgia. There are a lot of people and money living for Azerbaijan, Turkey, United Arab Emirates. Some go to Kazakhstan. So this is by no means pure Armenian phenomenon. And by no means the Armenian growth is only Russian phenomenon. But the Russian factors are the most important ones driving to these high numbers.
I'd love to continue on that line of reasoning for a bit. So, as you mentioned, one of the main drivers of this growth has been this influx of Russians and their money to Armenia and to Yerevan specifically. But that can't last forever. It's not an if it will end, but when it will end. So how sustainable is this growth, and where do you see that taking the economy?
Well, as I said, it creates certain problems and certain opportunities. Problems it creates, for example, through appreciation of money. When the money appreciates, it's not that bad a thing if you have time to adjust. What does it mean? Suddenly your labor becomes more expensive. If your labor becomes more expensive, you have to be more productive. Usually, in order to be more productive, it's not the skills of the labor alone, and it's not your organizational talents alone. Usually, you have to invest in new technologies. So if you can turn this incoming money into newer technologies, yes, it may have impact, but it will take a couple of years, because usually several years is the time when you conceptualize, bring it into existing business practices, churn a new technology into action, etc., etc. But it is extremely difficult for anybody to talk about long-term perspective about the region. It is both for Armenia proper, due to unresolved border issues, foreign troops in our country, continuing war in Russia or Ukraine. So as a result of that, what you are going to have such a level of uncertainty that you can only talk about scenarios. I don't know any baseline scenario that I can really say, this is 50% thing and this is the main scenario. There are too many of them. So that's the reason I am talking about a very short-term prospect. But it is obvious that the money that you are talking, it's not about if, it is about when, unless you are able to create conditions for them to stay. You cannot absorb that much money, but you can be a conduit between others, and you can be conduit and from this financial perspective. I'm not sure in all other sectors you can be the same conduit, because there are almost Cold War restrictions coming back, and there are much harder transaction security, compliance, etc. taking place, so you are not going to have the same ease of doing business. But it is impossible that all the money is going to leave immediately, and it is impossible that they are going to leave all of it. Some part of it is going to stay, and it's going to go away, not immediately. So as a result, you have to try to grow capacities to absorb that. How good we will be at that, difficult to tell, because it is not only about the government policies, it is also about the ability of private agents to accommodate and be fast. Some of them are very good, some of them are not. Some government policies may actually be restrictive, some government policies may be supportive for that. So it's too early to tell, because no government policies formulated and open are there in order to discuss. At the same time, there is no evidence that there is interference or the government doesn't want it to happen. It is very early to tell, because, as I said, 20% appreciation usually happens within a couple of years. We have this in 4 to 6 months. This is too much, too fast. It's not a problem of too much, the problem is too much being too fast.
So let's still continue with this banking sector conversation, if that's all right. Like you mentioned, Armenian banks are thriving, Russians are pouring money into Armenia. In your opinion, what should the Armenian government do, and what should this private sector do to harness this momentum and turn this short-term windfall into longer-term development?
Armenian government can actually take some liquidity out through fiscal instruments. And fiscal instruments, first of all, I mean debt instruments, to try to transform this money, if it even offers opportunities that are not very high paying, but still safe from the money owner's perspective. They can be an option of money staying idle there and actually earning something. There can be projects that are due, and the projects can be strategic projects that are of infrastructure, and they can be strategic projects that are going to help the defense of the country, many other things. There are many ways of dealing with that, because this type of influx cannot be dealt by monetary policy alone. It is mostly a fiscal response that should come. Now, it can be also erecting some barriers for them to come, but if you are looking at the barriers, they are already there, because the banks are charging quite high fees, because the banks are not encouraging this money. And it's not only again Armenia. If you are doing transactions in Georgia, if you are doing transactions in UAE, all of this money are charged high fees, because the banks are also have problem absorbing all of this inflow. Now there is often a question, maybe these high fees are because they are illegal. I believe they are not illegal because the banks are not going to risk their licenses to get into suspicious or illegal transactions because the compliance regime enforced by the United States, US banks, is quite stringent. And as a result, none of them would like to be blacklisted and consciously get into a risky behavior. But the increasing pace of the sanctions is making a lot of economic agents, sometimes ordinary people in Russia, think, okay, if I stay and I'm connected to the Russian financial system, which is dominated by big banks that are often, Sberbank, VTB, others, that are often under sanctions. There may be certain transactions that I would like to do and I can be blocked. Why I don't have a safety valve, some money out there, not for just exiting Russia, but gaining operational freedom to continue my business as business. Because you may need some type of payments that cannot be ordered and done through this or that Russian economic agent, etc., etc. So there is a lot of this zone, which is not gray, but it is white, but there are many people who are suspicious, and because of their scale and operations, they would rather stay away from it. And this quite legal money that is coming to Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, is very often finding their way. It's not that all the Russian money is here. It's not that all the Russian money is actually staying here in Armenian banks. No, we are in a tiny part of it. You have to understand that the economy of Russia is about 120 times, 150 times larger. And what we are seeing is a small percentage of money coming to Armenia through Armenia, and we are by far not the largest handler of these flows. So the question is fiscal response. It will both slow down and also take the money and take the pressure of the currency market, making the appreciation, which is inevitable, not stopped, but slower.
So finally, I would love to talk to you about the currency market, as you just mentioned, because I think there's a lot of confusion about this. And so, as you said, we've seen the dram currency appreciate very rapidly this year. What has that done to the economy, and why does it need to slow down, in your opinion, as you said?
What it has done to the economy is the following. Imagine that you have factors of production. It's capital, technology, labor. Suddenly, one component is becoming increasingly expensive, while the prices that you are charging are not increasing simultaneously. As a result, you are becoming less competitive. And if you are too low on profits, it is not making sense to engage in that activity because you would rather go and invest money in something safe paper, get 1 or 2% returns, and don't worry about everyday business headaches. On the other hand, the problem, as I said, is not the problem of appreciation that suddenly makes you more expensive and unable to compete. The question is, how fast is this changing? And there are certain parts that you have to understand. Does it make any difference or not on the viability of the enterprise? There are components that should be understood very well. For example, is it the business who is taking the hit, the owner? Maybe they have profit margins of 20%, now it's 10%. You can say, okay, what is the price you are paying for volatility? Is it the workers? Maybe they were getting some money based on dollars. Now the dollar has depreciated vis-a-vis dram, and now they are thinking, okay, but I'm getting paid less in dollars. Now the question is, does it matter if you are getting paid less in dollars? Because you are spending here, and the inflation that you are experiencing every day is in drams. So you have to differentiate between those. But if you are getting less dollars and you have critical supplies coming from outside, and these critical supplies that are priced in dollars, then you have much slower slack in your flexibility. So there is no one single answer. It depends on the business. What is your bottleneck? Is it your operational expenses? Is it your wage bill? Is it that the business doesn't make sense and nobody would engage in 0% profit tax of profit, for a long period of time? It's a judgment that every single industry is going to make. In some cases, the labor may be strong and demand their share because they are commanding their skills, and they are saying, if you don't pay, we are leaving. In some cases, it may be vice versa. So what the government should do, they should work and understand what the economy is doing, how different sectors are doing. Ministry of Economy has uttered the magic number of 450 as the intolerable level, saying that the currency rate should be there. Perhaps he means that because of that, when it is below, there are certain industries have major issues. I haven't seen calculations of it, but taking the logic of it, perhaps he's saying there are major problems with particular industries, but I cannot tell. There are major problems with labor in particular industries. There are major problems with capital. There are supply chain issues. All of this should be addressed in more detail, and I believe if you ask the ministry, they will give you much more detailed answers because all the bases of calculations are not public.
Well, Dr. Gabrielyan, thank you very much for joining us today. As always, your insights are extremely welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.